Rain hammered the streets of downtown Chicago as Damon Carter stepped from a black sedan outside the Ashbury Crown Hotel. The towering building glowed against the cold November darkness like a monument to old American money and inherited privilege. Damon adjusted the collar of his weathered brown jacket and studied the revolving doors carefully. He looked ordinary by design. Faded jeans, simple boots, a dark grey shirt without logos or luxury branding. The disguise always worked because prejudice depended on appearances. Inside the lobby, crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors and gold-trimmed pillars. Wealthy guests filled the seating areas, sipping cocktails beside a grand piano. Every detail whispered exclusivity. At the reception desk stood Eleanor Whitmore, the hotel's longtime operations director. 52 years old, perfect posture, silver jewelry, sharp blue eyes trained to evaluate people within seconds. She spotted Damon immediately. Her expression hardened. Damon approached calmly, carrying only a leather travel bag. His voice remained polite and steady despite the tension already gathering around him. "Good evening. Reservation under Carter Holdings." Eleanor barely glanced toward the computer. "I believe there must be some confusion," she replied smoothly. "Guests for our executive suites usually arrive through private concierge services." Nearby conversation slowed. Several guests watched openly. Damon remained composed. "The reservation was confirmed 3 days ago. Penthouse suite." Eleanor's lips tightened slightly. "Sir, this property maintains certain standards for our guests. Perhaps another hotel would better suit your needs." The words landed softly, but their meaning carried the familiar weight Damon had experienced since childhood. He recognized the strategy instantly. Never mention race directly. Hide discrimination behind etiquette and policy. A young valet standing near the entrance shifted uncomfortably. Damon slowly removed his phone. "Would you mind checking the reservation system?" Eleanor folded her hands together. "There's no need. We can usually identify fraudulent claims immediately." A wealthy businessman near the bar chuckled quietly. Another guest shook his head with smug approval. Damon studied the room carefully. The silence, the comfort, the collective agreement forming without anyone speaking openly. Outside, thunder rolled across Lake Michigan. Damon had built Carter International Hospitality from one struggling motel in Detroit into America's fastest-growing luxury hotel company. Forbes estimated his personal fortune near $3 billion. Yet tonight, dressed without visible wealth, he became invisible again. That was precisely why he came. 3 weeks earlier, Carter International quietly acquired Ashbury Crown's parent corporation through private negotiations. Damon now owned every property in the chain. But before announcing the acquisition publicly, he wanted to understand the company culture personally. Rumors had circulated for years. Selective treatment, unspoken policies, guests turned away without explanation. Minority employees pushed into back-office roles. Damon needed proof. Eleanor gestured towards security. 2 guards approached carefully. Both former military men judging the situation through incomplete information. "Sir," one guard said cautiously, "we're going to ask you to leave the premises." Damon nodded once. "I understand you're following instructions." Eleanor stepped from behind the desk, ensuring every guest witnessed her authority. "We cannot allow disruptions inside the hotel," she announced loudly. The humiliation became performance. A woman near the elevators whispered something about safety. Another guest lifted his phone discreetly, recording the encounter. Damon felt anger rise beneath his calm exterior, but years of discipline kept his expression steady. His late father once warned him about moments exactly like this. "They'll provoke emotion," his father used to say, "then punish you for showing it." Damon turned toward the exit with quiet dignity. As the revolving doors spun, cold wind swept into the lobby. Then he stopped. He looked directly at Eleanor. "I want everyone here to remember tonight," Damon said calmly. "Remember exactly how easy this felt." Eleanor crossed her arms. "Was that supposed to intimidate me?" Damon shook his head slowly. "No, it was supposed to warn you." The lobby fell silent. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Eleanor's face. Damon stepped outside into the freezing Chicago rain and pulled out his phone. Water dripped from his jacket sleeves while traffic lights reflected across the wet pavement. He made only one call. "Angela," he said quietly when his assistant answered, "activate the acquisition announcement immediately. Full executive transition begins tonight." Inside the hotel lobby, several employees suddenly stared at their phones. Breaking business alerts flooded across America. Carter International Hospitality had officially acquired Ashbury Crown Holdings, and its CEO was currently standing outside in the rain. The Ashbury Crown lobby transformed within minutes from comfortable luxury into quiet panic. Phones buzzed across marble counters and velvet seating areas, while guests searched the breaking news appearing simultaneously on financial networks nationwide. Eleanor Whitmore noticed the shift immediately. Conversation stopped when she approached. Employees exchanged nervous glances. One of the younger receptionists stared pale-faced at her monitor. "Eleanor," the receptionist whispered carefully, "you need to see this." Eleanor frowned impatiently and walked behind the desk. The headline froze her completely. Carter International acquires Ashbury Crown Holdings in multi-billion-dollar deal. Below the article stood a professional photograph of Damon Carter wearing a Navy-tailored suit beside the American flag during a business conference in New York. The same man she had just thrown into the rain. Her stomach tightened. "That's impossible," she muttered. The younger receptionist swallowed nervously. "It says he personally oversees executive evaluations during acquisitions." A businessman seated near the piano suddenly stood upright. "Oh my God," he whispered. "That was Damon Carter." Another guest quickly lowered her phone, embarrassed by the video she recorded earlier. Across the lobby, security officer Michael Reeves received a direct call through his earpiece. His expression changed instantly. "Yes, sir," he answered quietly. He listened carefully before turning toward Eleanor. "Corporate wants Mr. Carter welcomed immediately," Michael said. "The transition team arrives in 20 minutes. Eleanor's confidence cracked visibly. The realization spread through the room like wildfire. Every guest who applauded, every employee who stayed silent, every person who watched without intervening, now understood exactly what happened. Outside, Damon remained beneath the hotel awning, watching Chicago traffic move through heavy rain. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members, reporters, and executives, but Damon ignored most of them. His attention focused on memory. He remembered his mother cleaning office buildings overnight in Detroit during brutal winters. Korean immigrant, broken English, endless exhaustion. He remembered his father, a Black Army veteran, denied promotions despite years of service. Most of all, Damon remembered entering luxury spaces throughout his career and watching people decide his worth within seconds. The clothing changed. The hotels changed. The cities changed. But the assumptions never disappeared. His assistant, Angela, arrived quickly in a black SUV alongside 3 executive staff members. She stepped out carrying folders and tablets. "You were right," she said quietly. "Social media exploded already. Reporters are heading here now." Damon nodded. "How bad?" Angela hesitated. "Bad enough that several civil rights organizations contacted us within 15 minutes. Damon looked back through the glass doors. Inside, Eleanor stood frozen near the reception desk while employees avoided eye contact. "She humiliated me publicly because she felt protected," Damon said softly. "That confidence came from experience." Angela handed him a tablet. Internal reports filled the screen. Guest complaints, employee resignations, anonymous HR accusations buried for years. Patterns emerged immediately. Minority guests receiving excessive identification requests, Black executives mistaken for drivers, Latino families denied access to luxury amenities, Asian employees repeatedly passed over for management positions. The problem extended far beyond Eleanor. Damon closed the tablet slowly. "We rebuild everything," he said. Inside the lobby, Michael Reeves approached Eleanor carefully. "You should probably apologize before he comes back inside." Eleanor forced herself upright. "I followed procedure." Michael stared at her silently. "You never checked his reservation." Eleanor avoided his eyes. A large television above the lobby bar suddenly interrupted regular programming. Financial analysts discussed Damon Carter live on national television. Carter International changed modern hospitality. One commentator explained. Damon Carter built his reputation creating inclusive luxury experiences across America. The camera displayed footage of Damon speaking at Harvard Business School about economic inequality and discrimination in service industries. Several guests slowly turned toward Eleanor. The atmosphere changed completely. Earlier, she represented authority. Now she represented liability. The revolving doors suddenly opened. Damon Carter walked back inside. Rainwater glistened across his jacket while every eye followed him through the lobby. This time, nobody looked away. Michael immediately stepped aside. "Mr. Carter," he said respectfully. Damon nodded politely before approaching the reception desk once more. The same desk, the same marble floors, the same chandeliers. But now fear replaced certainty. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly. "Mr. Carter," she began weakly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Damon looked at her calmly. "No," he replied. "There was complete understanding. That's what makes this important." Silence settled heavily across the lobby. Angela stepped beside Damon and placed several folders onto the counter. Official acquisition documents, executive transition orders, termination authorizations. Eleanor stared downward as reality closed around her. Then Damon spoke words that shattered the remaining illusion of safety. "Tonight wasn't the first time this happened here," he said quietly. "Was it?" Eleanor Whitmore stood motionless beneath the crystal chandeliers while every guest watched her unravel in real time. The confidence that carried her through decades of quiet discrimination disappeared behind widening eyes and shallow breathing. Damon Carter remained perfectly calm. That frightened her most. Anger would have felt manageable. Calm felt permanent. "I asked you a question," Damon said quietly. "Was tonight the first time this happened here?" Eleanor looked toward the employees behind the desk, searching desperately for support. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Years earlier, silence protected her authority. Tonight, silence condemned her. Michael Reeves shifted uncomfortably near the entrance while reporters gathered outside the hotel doors. Camera lights flashed through the rain-covered glass. Angela opened one of the folders carefully. "Since January," she announced professionally, Ashbury Crown Chicago received 14 formal guest complaints involving discriminatory treatment. A murmur spread across the lobby. Angela continued. 8 involved black guests, 3 involved Latino families, 2 involved Middle Eastern business travelers, 1 involved an Asian American federal judge. Eleanor's face drained completely. "That's misleading," she whispered weakly. Damon tilted his head slightly. "Then explain it." She struggled for words. "We simply protect our standards. Luxury hospitality requires careful judgment." A middle-aged black woman seated near the fireplace suddenly stood. "So we're the threat?" she asked sharply. The room froze again. The woman walked slowly toward the reception desk wearing an elegant navy coat and diamond earrings. "I stayed here last winter," she continued. "Your staff followed my teenage son through the gift shop because they assumed he would steal something." Eleanor recognized her instantly. Federal Judge Cynthia Holloway from Atlanta, one of the complaints quietly buried months earlier. Judge Holloway looked directly at Damon. "I should have filed a lawsuit," she admitted, "but honestly, I was tired." Damon understood those words deeply. Tired, not angry, not surprised, just exhausted from carrying dignity through hostile spaces. A younger employee near the concierge desk suddenly spoke. "She warned us about certain guests during staff meetings." Eleanor spun toward him. "Daniel, stop talking." But something had shifted permanently. Fear no longer protected her. The employee swallowed hard. "She said people from certain neighborhoods damaged the hotel image," he continued nervously. "She told us to watch for fake reservations whenever minority guests arrived casually dressed." Gasps spread across the lobby. Several employees lowered their heads in shame. Damon remained silent while the truth surfaced naturally. That mattered. People trusted confessions more than accusations. Outside, reporters pushed through the front entrance alongside camera crews. News producers smelled national scandal. One reporter recognized Damon immediately. "Mr. Carter, did you personally experience discrimination tonight?" Damon glanced briefly toward the cameras. I experienced exactly what many Americans experience every day, he answered calmly. Another reporter raised her microphone. Will there be legal consequences? Damon looked toward Eleanor before answering. There will be accountability. The distinction felt deliberate. Accountability meant something larger than punishment. Angela handed Damon another document. Internal employee evaluations, high turnover among minority staff, repeated complaints against management, settlements hidden quietly through confidential agreements. Damon flipped through the pages slowly. Then he looked directly at Eleanor. How much money did this hotel spend hiding discrimination? Eleanor's voice cracked. You don't understand hospitality pressure. No, Damon replied softly. You never understood humanity. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Judge Holloway nodded silently. A young Latino bellhop stepped forward next. She told me guests preferred seeing certain employees in visible positions, he admitted quietly. After that, they moved me to overnight storage work. Another employee added his story. Then another. Years of fear collapsed under one moment of public exposure. The lobby transformed into testimony. Damon watched carefully. This was never only about him. It was about systems surviving through intimidation and silence. Eleanor finally snapped. You think you're changing the world? She shouted suddenly. People expect exclusivity in places like this. That's reality. The outburst echoed brutally across marble walls. Several guests visibly recoiled. Damon studied her with genuine sadness. My mother cleaned hotel bathrooms at night, he said quietly. She taught me luxury means service, comfort, dignity, not exclusion. Eleanor laughed bitterly. You built your empire pretending class differences don't exist. No, Damon answered calmly. I built it understanding that dignity should never depend on wealth, race, or appearance. The cameras captured everything. Every expression, every confession, every collapse. Social media exploded nationwide. Clips from the confrontation spread across millions of phones within minutes. Former employees began posting anonymous stories online. Travel bloggers shared experiences. Guests described humiliation they buried for years. The Ashbury Crown scandal became larger than one hotel before midnight. Angela's phone buzzed repeatedly. 3 corporate sponsors already suspended partnerships, she informed Damon quietly. Michael Reeves approached carefully. Sir, more employees want to speak privately. Damon nodded. Set up confidential interviews tomorrow morning. Then he looked across the transformed lobby one final time. Earlier tonight, this room applauded quiet humiliation. Now it witnessed public reckoning. Damon turned back toward Eleanor. You built your career making people feel small, he said softly. Tonight, everyone finally sees the cost. Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, another voice emerged from behind the crowd, a familiar voice. Mr. Carter, the older man said nervously, stepping forward from the bar area. I think I owe you an apology too. The older man stepped away from the bar slowly, his polished leather shoes echoing across the marble floor. Earlier, he had laughed quietly, while security escorted Damon toward the door. Now his face carried visible shame. My name is Richard Bennett, he said carefully. Investment banking, Boston. Damon recognized him immediately. Richard Bennett appeared regularly on financial television discussing American markets and corporate ethics. Millions respected his opinions. Tonight, none of that mattered. Richard removed his glasses with trembling hands. I watched everything happen, he admitted, and I said nothing. The lobby remained silent. Damon studied him carefully. Why? Richard looked toward the floor. Because it felt easier. The honesty unsettled everyone. No excuses, no elaborate defense. Just the simple confession hiding beneath countless moments of injustice across America. Comfort. Judge Cynthia Holloway crossed her arms. That's usually how these systems survive. Richard nodded painfully. I convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility. Damon remained quiet for several seconds, then he spoke softly. Neutrality always benefits the powerful. Several guests lowered their eyes. The statement reached beyond Richard, beyond Eleanor, beyond the hotel itself. Angela's tablet continued filling with incoming messages from employees across the country. Managers from other Ashbury Crown locations suddenly feared exposure. Patterns repeated everywhere. Complaints ignored. Selective enforcement. Luxury weaponized against dignity. A reporter stepped closer. "Mr. Carter, are you planning broader investigations across the company?" Damon answered without hesitation. "Immediately." Another reporter raised her microphone. "How extensive do you expect the problem to be?" Damon looked slowly around the lobby. "When discrimination becomes culturally acceptable," he replied, "it rarely exists in isolation." The sentence sent visible tension through several executives arriving hurriedly from corporate headquarters. Three men in expensive dark suits entered through the revolving doors, carrying briefcases and panic. Leading them was Harold Whitaker, former chairman of Ashbury Crown Holdings. 64 years old Chicago wealth, country club confidence. Tonight, he looked terrified. "Mr. Carter," Harold said quickly, extending his hand, "we deeply regret this unfortunate misunderstanding." Damon ignored the handshake. There was no misunderstanding. Harold's expression tightened. Eleanor acted independently. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable looks. Damon noticed immediately. "You want to blame one woman for an institutional culture?" he asked calmly. Harold adjusted his tie nervously. "We had no knowledge of discriminatory practices." Judge Holloway laughed sharply. "That's insulting." Angela opened another folder. "Actually," she interrupted professionally, "internal legal records show direct board awareness of at least 9 discrimination settlements during the past 4 years. Harold went pale. Reporters instantly pushed forward. "Mr. Whitaker, did the board knowingly conceal discrimination claims? Were minority guests financially silenced? Did executives approve non-disclosure agreements?" The questions hit like gunfire. Harold looked toward Eleanor desperately. For years, she protected the company's image. Tonight, she became evidence. Damon finally stepped closer to the reception desk where everything began. He rested one hand against the polished marble surface. "My father loved hotels," he said quietly. "When I was a kid, he believed luxury represented American success." The room listened carefully. "He worked double shifts after military service just to take our family on vacations once every few years." Damon's voice remained steady. But every trip carried tension. Every check-in became a test. Would we be welcomed? Watched? Humiliated? Michael Reeves lowered his head. Damon continued, "I built Carter International because I wanted families like mine to rest without fear." The emotion beneath his calm words affected the entire room. Even some reporters stopped writing. Eleanor suddenly looked exhausted instead of defensive. "You think firing me changes anything?" she asked quietly. Damon considered the question honestly. "No," he answered, "but accountability creates pressure. Pressure creates change." Angela handed him another report. Employee demographics, management structures, promotion disparities. The numbers revealed everything. Minority employees filled housekeeping, maintenance, and kitchen positions. Executive leadership remained overwhelmingly white. The exclusion wasn't accidental. It was engineered. Richard Bennett stepped forward again. "My company finances luxury developments nationwide," he admitted publicly. "If this culture exists elsewhere, investors share responsibility too." Harold Whitaker stared at him in disbelief. "You're turning against us?" Richard looked genuinely disturbed. "No, I'm finally paying attention." Outside, more news vans lined the street, while social media live streams attracted millions of viewers nationwide. The story no longer belonged solely to Damon. Americans recognized themselves inside it. Some remembered humiliation, others remembered silence. Both felt uncomfortable. A young black concierge employee named Alicia suddenly stepped forward from the back office. Her voice trembled. "I almost quit last month," she admitted. "Guests constantly assumed I wasn't management material. Eleanor told me smiling more would make people comfortable." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Alicia continued, "I worked here 5 years, never received one promotion interview." Damon looked toward Angela. "Effective tomorrow," he announced, "independent auditors will review every employment decision across this company during the past decade." The executives looked horrified. Damon wasn't containing damage. He was excavating truth. Harold Whitaker lowered his voice urgently. This level of exposure could destroy the brand. Damon looked directly at him. No, he replied calmly. The discrimination already did that. Exposure simply reveals it. The lobby fell silent once more. Then Michael Reeves received another message through his earpiece. His expression changed immediately. "Sir," he said carefully to Damon, "there's someone outside asking specifically for Eleanor." Damon frowned slightly. "Who?" Michael hesitated. "A former employee." Rain continued falling across downtown Chicago, while the Ashbury Crown lobby stood frozen beneath television lights and camera flashes. Every conversation stopped when the revolving doors opened again. A woman in her early 60s stepped carefully inside. Dark green coat, grey streaks through tied-back hair, weathered hands carrying decades of hard labor. Michael Reeves approached cautiously. "She insisted on speaking tonight," he explained quietly to Damon. The woman looked directly at Eleanor Whitmore. Recognition hit Eleanor instantly. "Oh God," she whispered. The woman nodded once. "My name is Gloria Ramirez," she said calmly. "You fired me 3 years ago." Several employees exchanged shocked looks. Angela immediately searched the employee database on her tablet. Former housekeeping supervisor, 18 years employed. Termination reason listed as repeated behavioral conflicts. Gloria laughed softly after seeing the expression on Angela's face. "That's not what happened." Damon gestured respectfully. "Please tell us." Gloria stepped farther into the lobby while reporters adjusted microphones eagerly. "I started working here in 1999, she began. Single mother, 2 sons, needed steady income." Her voice remained controlled despite visible emotion. "For years, I worked double shifts without complaints, trained new staff, covered holidays, protected this hotel like family." Eleanor looked physically ill. Gloria continued. "Then management changed." She looked directly at Eleanor. "You started removing darker-skinned employees from visible positions." A stunned silence spread across the room. Gloria pointed toward the luxury dining area. Guests complained about seeing too many minority employees serving wealthy customers. Instead of defending us, she moved us downstairs. Judge Holloway closed her eyes briefly. She had heard versions of this story her entire career. America always changed the wording, never the system. Angela reviewed additional files quickly. Gloria received excellent performance evaluations for 17 consecutive years, she announced. Damon looked toward Eleanor. Why was she fired? Eleanor struggled visibly. There were professionalism concerns. Gloria shook her head slowly. "No, I complained after hearing supervisors joke about Hispanic guests stealing towels." Several employees gasped quietly. Gloria's eyes hardened. 3 weeks later, they accused me of creating workplace tension. Michael Reeves stared toward Eleanor with growing disbelief. "How many people did this happen to?" he asked quietly. Eleanor avoided his eyes. That answer alone revealed everything. Damon walked slowly toward Gloria. "You came tonight because of the news?" Gloria nodded. "My younger son saw the story online. He told me the man humiliated in front of cameras bought the company." She smiled faintly at Damon. "He said maybe justice finally arrived." The lobby became completely still. Justice, not revenge, not humiliation. Justice. Damon understood the difference deeply. Angela suddenly looked up from her tablet. "Sir," she said carefully, "I found something important." She turned the screen toward him. Internal executive emails, years old. One message from Eleanor directly to senior management froze the room completely. "Maintaining the proper atmosphere requires careful guest screening and employee presentation standards." Another executive responded, "Understood. Continue protecting the brand image." Reporters erupted instantly. Did executives knowingly support racial exclusion policies? Were discriminatory practices intentionally disguised as luxury branding? Harold Whitaker looked trapped. "These emails lack context," he argued weakly. Judge Holloway stepped forward sharply. "No," she replied, "they contain exactly the context America always hides." Gloria slowly approached the reception desk, the same place where Damon had been rejected hours earlier. "You know the saddest part?" she asked quietly. Employees learned survival required silence. Her words struck harder than accusations. I watched young workers change their names to sound more American, she continued. I watched black employees straighten their hair before meetings. I watched immigrant staff apologize for accents. Several hotel employees wiped tears quietly. Damon looked around the transformed lobby. The building suddenly felt heavier, not because truth arrived, because truth had waited so long. Outside, thunder shook the city skyline. Inside, another employee finally stepped forward. Then another. Stories poured out naturally now. Denied promotions, guest profiling, management jokes, unequal discipline, fear disguised as professionalism. Damon listened carefully without interrupting. Leadership sometimes required speaking. Tonight required listening. Alicia, the young concierge employee, looked toward Gloria with admiration. How did you survive this place for 18 years? Gloria smiled sadly. Some of us stayed because we hoped things might change. Damon absorbed those words quietly. Hope. America survived because people carried impossible amounts of it. Angela's phone suddenly rang. She answered briefly before turning toward Damon. The New York Attorney General's office just contacted us, she announced carefully. They're opening a formal civil rights investigation into Ashbury Crown Holdings. Shock rippled across the executives. Harold Whitaker nearly stumbled backward. This cannot become federal, he whispered. Damon looked directly at him. It already became national. Reporters immediately rushed outside to broadcast breaking updates. The story had crossed another line, no longer corporate scandal. Now potential criminal investigation. Eleanor suddenly spoke with desperate urgency. You think exposing this fixes America? Damon answered honestly. No. The room looked surprised. But hiding it guarantees nothing changes. Gloria slowly removed an old employee badge from her coat pocket. Faded photo. Cracked plastic. Nearly 2 decades of invisible labor. She placed it gently onto the reception counter. I kept this because I wanted proof I existed here, she said softly. Damon stared at the badge silently. Then Gloria looked toward Eleanor one final time. You spent years deciding who belonged, she whispered. Tonight, America finally decided about you. Before anyone could respond, the hotel entrance burst open again. This time, uniformed investigators walked inside. 3 investigators from the Illinois Civil Rights Division entered the Ashbury Crown lobby, wearing dark overcoats damp from the Chicago rain. Their arrival changed the atmosphere instantly. This was no longer public embarrassment. Now it carried legal weight. The lead investigator, Denise Harper, stepped forward confidently with a leather portfolio under one arm. Mid-40s, calm eyes, precise movements developed through years confronting institutional misconduct. Mr. Carter, she said professionally, extending her hand, thank you for remaining on site. Damon shook her hand politely. I assume the governor's office already contacted you. Denise nodded. About 20 minutes ago? Reporters surged closer while camera crews repositioned equipment across the lobby. Harold Whitaker looked visibly shaken. This level of response seems unnecessary, he protested weakly. Denise turned toward him without emotion. 17 complaints, multiple settlements, public discrimination involving executive leadership. We consider that necessary. Silence followed immediately. Eleanor Whitmore sat heavily onto a nearby chair, exhaustion replacing arrogance entirely. The investigators separated efficiently. One officer began speaking privately with employees. Another collected security footage and reservation records. Denise approached the reception desk where Damon's humiliation unfolded earlier. Walk me through exactly what happened tonight, she requested. Damon remained factual. No exaggeration, no theatrical anger. That made the account even more devastating. I entered around 7:15, he explained calmly. Requested confirmation for a legitimate reservation. Ms. Whitmore refused verification immediately based on personal assumptions. Denise wrote carefully. Then? She publicly questioned my legitimacy, implied criminal intent, and ordered security removal without checking company records. Michael Reeves stepped forward quietly. That part is true, he admitted. She instructed us before verifying anything. Denise looked toward Eleanor. Did you deny service without checking identification or reservation records? Eleanor stared downward. Yes. The admission landed brutally. Several employees closed their eyes. Judge Cynthia Holloway watched silently from nearby seating. She understood moments like this. Systems rarely collapsed from outside attacks. Usually they collapsed once people stopped lying. Angela handed Denise additional documents: internal complaints, human resources correspondence, settlement agreements, executive emails. Denise flipped through them slowly. This is extensive, she murmured. Harold Whittaker's immediately interrupted. These allegations remain unverified. Gloria Ramirez laughed bitterly. Funny how evidence always becomes questionable once powerful people feel threatened. Harold avoided her eyes. Another investigator approached Denise carrying printed records from employee archives. Promotion statistics confirm racial disparities across management positions, he reported quietly. Angela nodded. Minority employees represented 68% of service staff, but only 8% of executive leadership. The numbers echoed through the lobby like an indictment. Damon looked toward the younger employees gathered near the concierge station, fear mixed with cautious hope across their faces. For years, speaking risked careers. Tonight, silence finally seemed more dangerous. A hotel chef stepped forward unexpectedly. "My name is Marcus Hill," he said nervously, "executive kitchen staff." Denise motioned carefully. "Go ahead," Marcus swallowed hard. Managers warned us whenever influential guests preferred seeing white servers only. Gasps spread immediately. Harold Whittaker snapped angrily. "That's outrageous." Marcus looked directly at him. No, outrageous was pretending this behavior protected the brand. The investigators documented every statement carefully. Outside, protesters began gathering beyond police barriers. Some held signs demanding accountability. Others simply watched in silence. Chicago recognized the story unfolding inside, not because it shocked people, because it felt painfully familiar. Damon noticed a young black boy standing outside beside his mother in the rain, maybe 12 years old. The child stared through the glass toward the lobby with intense focus. Damon remembered being that age, watching adults navigate dignity carefully inside spaces not designed for them. The memory tightened his chest unexpectedly. Denise closed her notebook slowly. "Mr. Carter," she said, "off the record, why stay tonight?" Damon considered carefully. "Because humiliation grows strongest when witnesses disappear." Denise nodded slowly. She understood completely. Across the lobby, Eleanor suddenly spoke again. "I never hated anyone," she whispered weakly. The room turned toward her. Tears finally streaked her face. "I just believed certain expectations existed in luxury hospitality." Judge Holloway stood immediately. "That's how discrimination survives," she replied sharply. "Not always through hatred, through comfort." Eleanor looked shattered. "But guests expected exclusivity." Damon answered quietly. "No, they expected excellence. You confused the two." The statement silenced everyone again. Denise approached Eleanor carefully. "Ms. Whitmore, based on preliminary findings, your employment termination appears fully justified. Additional legal recommendations will follow after investigation." Eleanor closed her eyes. Her entire career collapsed within one evening. But deeper than career loss came realization: the rules protecting her no longer worked. Angela's phone buzzed continuously with updates from national media: CNN, MSNBC, Financial Times, The Wall Street Journal. America watched the Ashbury Crown live, and something unexpected happened. People began sharing their own stories: restaurant discrimination, bank profiling, retail humiliation, airport suspicion. Thousands of memories surfaced online simultaneously. The hotel lobby became symbolic overnight, not exceptional, representative. Denise received another call and listened carefully before turning toward Damon. "The Department of Justice requested copies of all internal records," she announced. Harold Whittaker nearly collapsed into a chair. Federal involvement meant survival became unlikely. Damon looked across the marble lobby where fear once protected prejudice. Now truth moved freely through the room. Then the revolving doors opened once more. This time, a young woman rushed inside, carrying a small overnight bag. The moment Eleanor saw her, genuine panic crossed her face. "Emily?" Eleanor whispered. The young woman looked directly at Damon. "I'm her daughter," she said softly, "and there's something you deserve to know." The young woman standing inside the Ashbury Crown lobby looked barely 23 years old. Rain soaked the shoulders of her denim jacket, while nervous exhaustion shadowed her face. Eleanor Whitmore stared at her daughter in complete disbelief. "Emily, what are you doing here?" she whispered. Emily ignored the question. Her attention remained fixed on Damon Carter. "I saw everything online," she said quietly, "and I couldn't stay silent anymore." The lobby grew still again. Another confession approached, another fracture opening beneath years of carefully protected lies. Eleanor stood quickly. "This isn't necessary." Emily finally looked toward her mother. "Yes," she replied softly, "it is." Damon studied the young woman carefully, fear mixed with determination across her expression. He recognized that combination. Truth often arrived trembling. Denise Harper stepped slightly aside. "You're free to speak if you wish," she said professionally. Emily nodded. "My mother wasn't acting alone." Harold Whittaker closed his eyes immediately. The room reacted instantly. Reporters pushed forward. Camera lights brightened. Angela opened another blank file on her tablet. Emily tightened her grip on the overnight bag. "I grew up hearing conversations about protecting the hotel image," she continued. "Executives used coded language constantly." Judge Holloway crossed her arms knowingly. "Describe the language." Emily swallowed hard. "They talked about maintaining atmosphere, preserving clientele comfort, avoiding cultural mismatch." The phrases sounded polished, professional, respectable. That made them more dangerous. Damon remained silent. Emily continued, "My father used to argue with her about it." Eleanor's face tightened painfully. "Emily, stop." But the young woman kept speaking. "He said the company trained people to discriminate without using racist words directly." The lobby erupted into shocked murmurs. Harold Whittaker stepped forward sharply. "These are private family matters." "No," Emily replied immediately. "This became public the moment people lost dignity inside this building." Damon watched Eleanor carefully. Something deeper than fear crossed her expression now. Regret, not necessarily for what she did, but for who witnessed it. Emily slowly opened the overnight bag. Inside sat old company binders and printed emails. Angela immediately looked alarmed. "What are those?" Emily lifted one folder carefully. "My father kept copies before he died." Silence crushed the lobby. Eleanor looked physically shaken. "Your father promised he destroyed those documents." Emily's voice cracked slightly. "He wanted to expose everything before his heart attack." Harold Whittaker stepped backward. For the first time all night, genuine terror crossed his face. Denise Harper approached immediately. "Miss Whitmore, may we examine those records?" Emily handed her the folders. Inside were years of internal communications, training recommendations, executive strategy memos, guest profiling discussions. One document stopped Denise instantly. "Preferred Client Preservation Initiative," she read quietly. Judge Holloway laughed once in disbelief. "Even the title sounds illegal." Angela scanned additional pages rapidly. "They categorized guests by appearance indicators," she said coldly. The room froze. Michael Reeves looked sick. "What does that mean?" Angela stared directly at Harold Whittaker. "It means executives developed internal systems identifying guests considered financially or culturally undesirable." The words hit like an explosion. Reporters nearly shouted questions over each other. Was racial profiling company policy? How many hotels used these procedures? Did investors know? Harold raised both hands desperately. "These documents lack operational context." Emily snapped toward him instantly. "My father killed himself trying to escape your context." The entire lobby went silent. Even camera operators stopped moving. Eleanor looked shattered. "Emily." Tears finally rolled down the young woman's face. "He spent years helping create these systems," she whispered. "Then he realized what they were doing to people." Damon's chest tightened unexpectedly. America carried countless hidden casualties. Some suffered humiliation directly, others drowned inside guilt. Emily wiped her eyes roughly. He started drinking heavily after one guest incident in Dallas. Denise listened carefully. What happened? Emily looked toward Damon. A black surgeon was denied access to a presidential suite because management assumed his credit cards were stolen. Judge Holloway shook her head slowly. The story sounded horrifyingly ordinary. My father approved the incident report, Emily continued. Later he found out the surgeon saved children at a trauma hospital nearby. The lobby felt colder suddenly. Outside police barriers expanded as crowds continued gathering in the rain. America watched institutional racism unfold with corporate paperwork attached. That changed everything. Eleanor finally spoke through tears. I thought I was protecting my career. Damon looked at her calmly. And how many lives did that cost? The question lingered heavily. No one answered, because nobody could. Angela suddenly looked up from the files. Sir, she said quietly to Damon, these policies reached at least 32 properties nationwide. Harold Whitaker grabbed the edge of a chair for support. The scandal had become catastrophic. Not local corruption, national coordination. Denise closed one folder carefully. These records may support federal civil rights conspiracy charges. The room reacted instantly. Conspiracy. The word changed everything. Emily looked exhausted now, emotionally emptied by years of silence finally breaking apart. Damon approached her gently. You didn't have to come tonight. Emily shook her head. Yes, she whispered, I really did. For a moment, Damon saw something tragic inside Eleanor's expression, not simply downfall, inheritance, children forced to carry moral debts created by their parents. Then Angela received another urgent message. Her face changed immediately. Sir, she said carefully, the White House just released a statement about the investigation. The announcement from the White House appeared simultaneously across every television screen inside the Ashbury Crown lobby. News anchors interrupted scheduled programming while reporters rushed outside for live broadcasts. Angela read the statement carefully from her phone. Tonight's events in Chicago reflect broader concerns regarding equal access, workplace discrimination, and civil rights protections in American institutions. The lobby stood frozen. Then Angela continued. The administration fully supports ongoing federal investigations into discriminatory business practices within the hospitality industry. Harold Whitaker collapsed heavily into a chair. Federal scrutiny alone threatened destruction. Public support from Washington guaranteed it. Damon remained composed, but internally he understood the moment becoming larger than anyone expected. This was no longer simply about one hotel chain. America had found a mirror, and millions recognized themselves inside it. Emily Whitmore sat quietly near the fireplace, while Denise Harper reviewed additional documents from the overnight bag. Every page deepened the investigation: corporate strategies, internal training language, demographic targeting reports, guest exclusion patterns disguised as luxury branding. Judge Holloway stared toward the towering chandeliers above the lobby. You know what's terrifying? She said softly. Several reporters turned toward her. This system survived because everyone involved believed they were respectable people. The statement landed brutally. Respectability often protected cruelty better than open hatred ever could. Michael Reeves paced slowly near the entrance. For years, he admitted quietly, security received unofficial warnings before certain guests arrived. Denise looked up immediately. What kind of warnings? Michael hesitated. Extra verification requests, increased monitoring instructions. Sometimes management specifically mentioned race without saying race directly. Angela typed rapidly. Can you provide examples? Michael nodded reluctantly. They called it elevated discretion protocol. The lobby erupted again. A reporter near the elevators nearly whispered the words back. Elevated discretion. The language sounded polished, professional, corporate. That made it even uglier. Damon walked slowly toward the massive front windows overlooking Chicago's streets, packed with media vans and protesters. Outside, signs rose through the rain. Dignity is not luxury. We belong everywhere. Silence enables discrimination. The movement was already growing beyond the hotel. Angela approached beside him. Social media traffic crossed 70 million interactions, she said quietly. People are sharing stories from airlines, banks, restaurants, universities. Damon nodded slowly. America was waiting for permission to talk. Behind them, Harold Whittaker suddenly stood. This company created thousands of jobs, he argued desperately. We donated millions to charities. We supported communities. Judge Holloway looked directly at him. Good deeds never erase systemic harm. Harold's face hardened. You're turning one mistake into national hysteria. Emily Whitmore stood abruptly. One mistake? She repeated sharply. She pointed toward the documents scattered across the reception desk. These files cover 14 years. The emotion inside her voice silenced the room instantly. My father died believing he helped build something poisonous. Eleanor finally broke completely. She covered her face with trembling hands while years of buried guilt surfaced publicly. I didn't know how to stop it, she whispered. Damon turned slowly toward her. You benefited from it. The words carried no cruelty, only truth. That made them unbearable. Denise Harper's phone rang sharply. She answered quietly before her expression shifted. The Department of Justice authorized emergency seizure orders for all executive communication archives, she announced. Harold Whittaker looked physically faint. No, he whispered. Yes, Denise replied firmly. Federal investigators believe evidence destruction risks are significant. The executives exchanged terrified looks. Years of hidden systems suddenly faced exposure. Every deleted complaint, every confidential settlement, every coded memo. Everything. Alicia, the young concierge employee, stepped toward Damon cautiously. Sir, she asked quietly, what happens to workers like us now? Damon looked around the lobby carefully. Fear filled every employee expression. Not fear of justice, fear of collapse. He understood immediately. Systems harmed workers too, even those trapped inside them. No one loses employment because they survived a broken culture, Damon answered clearly, but everyone will face accountability for their choices moving forward. Several employees visibly relaxed. Hope returned carefully, small, fragile, necessary. Judge Holloway smiled faintly for the first time all night. That, she said quietly, is leadership. Damon ignored the compliment. This moment required responsibility, not celebration. Outside, protesters began chanting together beneath flashing police lights. The sound carried faintly through the glass. Justice, justice, justice. Emily Whitmore walked slowly toward her mother. Eleanor looked older suddenly, smaller, human. I spent my childhood listening to you defend these policies, Emily whispered painfully. Do you know what that did to me? Eleanor cried silently. I thought success required compromise. Emily shook her head. No, you taught me comfort mattered more than courage. The sentence shattered something inside Eleanor completely. Michael Reeves looked away respectfully. Some truths felt too intimate to witness. Angela suddenly received another urgent message. Her eyes widened. Sir, she said carefully to Damon, major hotel chains are already contacting us. Damon frowned slightly. Why? Angela looked stunned herself. They want Carter International to oversee emergency discrimination audits at their properties before investigators reach them. The room absorbed the implication slowly. One night inside a Chicago hotel had triggered panic across an entire industry. Then Damon's phone rang personally. He checked the screen, and for the first time all evening, genuine surprise crossed his face. The call came from his younger brother, Isaiah, a man Damon had not spoken to in nearly 8 years. Damon stared at his phone while chaos continued unfolding around him inside the Ashbury Crown lobby. The name on the screen felt unreal. Isaiah Carter. 8 years of silence suddenly vibrating in his hand. Angela noticed the change immediately. You okay? She asked quietly. Damon answered honestly. I don't know. The phone continued ringing. Outside, protesters chanted beneath flashing police lights while reporters delivered live national updates. Inside, federal investigators gathered evidence from a collapsing hospitality empire. Yet suddenly, Damon's entire focus narrowed toward one unanswered call. His younger brother, the only person who truly remembered life before success. Damon stepped away from the cameras toward a quieter hallway near the ballroom entrance before answering. Isaiah. Several seconds passed silently. Then his brother spoke. I saw the news. Isaiah's voice sounded older, tired, still carrying Detroit inside every syllable. Damon leaned against the wall slowly. Yeah. Another silence followed. Finally, Isaiah laughed softly. You always did know how to start a fire. Despite everything happening, Damon almost smiled. For a moment, he felt 16 years old again. Two brothers sharing a cramped bedroom while Chicago winter winds rattled apartment windows. You disappeared, Damon said quietly. Isaiah exhaled heavily. So did you. The words landed harder than expected. Success created distance Damon rarely admitted publicly. Billion-dollar boardrooms, private jets, corporate interviews. Meanwhile, Isaiah stayed behind caring for their father during his final illness. Damon carried guilt about that every day. I called because Mum would have been proud tonight, Isaiah said softly. Damon closed his eyes briefly. Their mother died before Carter International became successful. She never saw the empire built from her sacrifices. She used to say hotels revealed America's soul, Isaiah continued. Who gets welcomed? Who gets watched? Who gets judged? Damon looked back toward the lobby where cameras still flashed endlessly. She was right. Isaiah's voice grew more serious. Be careful, Damon. What do you mean? You embarrassed powerful people publicly. That creates enemies. Damon understood immediately. Wealth tolerated reform quietly. Public accountability threatened systems, especially profitable ones. Back inside the lobby, Denise Harper approached Angela urgently. We found evidence of communication between Ashbury executives and external political donors, she explained quietly. Angela frowned. What kind of communication? Denise lowered her voice. Coordination regarding discrimination lawsuits and media suppression strategies. Angela looked stunned. The scandal kept expanding outward, not isolated corruption, networked protection. Judge Holloway overheard enough to understand. Of course, she muttered bitterly, systems protect themselves. Meanwhile, Damon remained in the hallway, listening to his brother breathe quietly across the line. How's Dad's old neighborhood? Damon asked softly. Isaiah laughed once. Still forgotten. The honesty hurt. Damon built luxury towers while entire communities back home continued struggling with abandoned schools and empty factories. Isaiah sensed the guilt immediately. You can't save everyone. Damon stared toward the polished hotel ballroom doors. No, he admitted, but I should have called. Another silence, then Isaiah spoke carefully. There's something else you need to know. Damon straightened. What? Dad investigated discrimination cases before he died. The hallway suddenly felt colder. My father? Isaiah continued quietly. He never told you because he thought you already carried too much pressure building the company. Damon struggled to process the words. Their father rarely discussed pain directly. Army veterans from his generation survived through silence. He documented housing discrimination in Detroit during the 90s, Isaiah explained. Banks, hotels, employers. Damon's chest tightened. Why are you telling me this now? Because one of the companies he investigated eventually merged into Ashbury Crown Holdings. Everything inside Damon went still. The coincidence felt impossible, yet somehow inevitable. America recycled the same systems repeatedly. Different industries, different decades, same machinery. Inside the lobby, Emily Whitmore sat alone now, while Eleanor remained surrounded by investigators and attorneys. Mother and daughter avoided eye contact entirely. Some damage exceeded repair. Michael Reeves approached Damon cautiously. Sir, federal agents want immediate access to archived executive offices upstairs. Damon nodded automatically. Then Isaiah spoke again through the phone. Dad kept records hidden somewhere. Damon frowned. What kind of records? Names, companies, financial connections, people who buried discrimination lawsuits quietly. Damon felt his heartbeat slow dangerously. This was becoming larger than hospitality. Far larger. Where are the files now? Isaiah hesitated. That's the problem. Damon waited. They disappeared after Dad's funeral. The hallway suddenly filled with tension, not corporate, personal, historical, dangerous. Isaiah lowered his voice further. 2 men came looking for those records 3 days after he died. Damon's expression hardened instantly. Who were they? I never found out, but they knew exactly what Dad had been investigating. Back in the lobby, Denise Harper received another urgent update from federal headquarters. Her face changed immediately. She turned toward Damon. "Mr. Carter," she called sharply, "we may have a much bigger situation developing." Damon slowly lowered the phone, because deep inside he already knew. Tonight was never only about one hotel. It was about a system old enough to bury people quietly. And somebody clearly wanted those buried secrets to stay hidden forever. The atmosphere inside the Ashbury Crown shifted from scandal to something darker the moment Denise Harper spoke. Federal investigators moved with sharper urgency, while reporters sensed the story changing direction. Damon ended the call with Isaiah slowly. "Don't tell anyone else about those files," he warned quietly. Isaiah's voice remained tense. "I already made that mistake once." The line disconnected. Damon stood motionless for several seconds. His father spent years secretly documenting institutional discrimination. Then mysterious people searched for those records after his death. Now a luxury hotel scandal somehow connected back to those same buried systems. The realization felt terrifying, not because it surprised him, because it didn't. Denise approached quickly, carrying a tablet filled with newly transferred federal records. "We found overlapping corporate structures tied to Ashbury Crown's historical investors," she explained. Angela stepped beside Damon immediately. "What kind of overlap?" Denise lowered her voice. "Real estate firms, banking groups, political consulting organizations, several previously accused of discriminatory lending practices during the 90s. Judge Holloway overheard enough to understand instantly. The same networks recycled themselves." Denise nodded. "Different industries, same executives." Harold Whitaker looked furious now, rather than frightened. "You're turning a hospitality issue into conspiracy fiction." Damon looked directly at him. "My father investigated housing discrimination 25 years ago. One of those companies merged into your organization." For the first time all night, Harold genuinely lost composure. His expression betrayed recognition. That was enough. Angela noticed immediately. "You knew him," she said quietly. Harold recovered too slowly. "I met thousands of people during my career." But Damon already understood. This connection reached backward through decades. The lobby television screens suddenly shifted toward another breaking story. Financial analysts now discussed possible federal corruption investigations tied to Ashbury Crown Holdings. Stock prices collapsed live on air. Investors panicked. One commentator summarized the situation bluntly. "This may become the largest corporate discrimination scandal in modern hospitality history." Outside, protesters continued growing despite heavy rain. Chicago police expanded barricades around the entire city block. The movement spreading online now carried a new phrase: "Not one hotel." Alicia stood beside Gloria Ramirez, watching the television coverage silently. "You think things really change after this?" Alicia asked quietly. Gloria considered carefully. "Only if people stay uncomfortable long enough." The answer lingered painfully. America often loved outrage briefly. Systems survived because attention disappeared faster than suffering. Meanwhile, federal agents entered executive offices upstairs, searching archived financial records. Denise received updates constantly through encrypted messages. Then one update stopped her cold. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "we found evidence somebody accessed archived personnel files 2 nights ago." Damon's expression sharpened. "What kind of files?" "Former discrimination settlements, internal investigations, employee testimony." Angela frowned. "Someone tried cleaning records before the acquisition announcement." Denise nodded. "Looks that way." Harold Whitaker remained silent. Too silent. Damon noticed. "You knew federal attention was coming." He said calmly. Harold snapped back immediately. "That's ridiculous." Judge Holloway stepped closer. No, what's ridiculous is believing people still fear powerful institutions more than exposure. Emily Whitmore looked toward Damon carefully. My father mentioned another name before he died. The lobby turned toward her instantly. Who? Damon asked. Emily swallowed nervously. Lawson Equity Group. Denise looked stunned. Angela immediately searched the name. Her face changed. Lawson financed multiple hotel acquisitions during the early 2000s. Damon felt a cold wave move through his chest. He recognized the company. Lawson Equity invested heavily in urban redevelopment projects connected to discriminatory displacement lawsuits years earlier, and Damon once nearly partnered with them himself. The realization shook him deeply. He had almost entered business willingly with people connected to the same systems his father investigated. Michael Reeves approached hurriedly from the entrance. Sir, there's another issue. Damon looked toward him. A black SUV has been parked across the street for over an hour. Same two men inside. They keep photographing everyone entering and leaving. Denise's expression hardened immediately. Federal surveillance teams? Michael shook his head. No government plates. Angela moved closer to Damon instinctively. The atmosphere changed again. This no longer felt entirely public. Now it carried threat. Harold Whitaker suddenly stood. I want legal representation before answering additional questions. Denise nodded calmly. That would be wise, but Damon noticed something important. Harold wasn't protecting himself anymore. He looked afraid for someone else. Outside, lightning flashed across the Chicago skyline while television helicopters circled overhead. Inside the hotel, decades of buried systems slowly surfaced under federal scrutiny. Damon walked toward the giant lobby windows again. Across the street, he spotted the black SUV immediately. Two men inside, watching, waiting. One of them raised a camera directly toward the hotel entrance. Damon's instincts sharpened instantly. His father's missing records, corporate cover-ups, secret file removals, unknown men appearing tonight. None of this felt accidental anymore. Angela joined him quietly. You think they're connected? Damon answered honestly. Yes. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. No caller identification. Everyone nearby noticed the tension immediately. Damon answered slowly. A distorted male voice spoke only one sentence. Your father should have stopped digging. The distorted voice disappeared immediately after delivering the message. Your father should have stopped digging. Then silence. The line disconnected. Damon lowered the phone slowly while every instinct inside him sharpened at once. Around him, the Ashbury Crown lobby still buzzed with reporters, investigators, frightened executives, and exhausted employees. But suddenly the room felt distant, focused, dangerous. Angela stepped closer immediately. What did they say? Damon looked toward the black SUV parked across the rain-soaked street. They knew my father. Denise Harper moved instantly into professional mode. Give me the number. Damon handed her the phone. She forwarded the information directly to federal cyber investigators, while Michael Reeves quietly contacted Chicago police officers stationed outside. Across the street, the SUV remained motionless, watching. Harold Whitaker looked increasingly pale. Damon noticed immediately. You recognize this, Damon said calmly. Harold avoided eye contact. I don't know what you're talking about. Judge Holloway laughed bitterly. That answer usually means yes. Emily Whitmore stepped toward Damon carefully. My father used to receive strange calls too, she admitted softly. The room turned silent again. Eleanor looked shocked. You never told me that. Emily's voice hardened. You never wanted to know. Denise returned after speaking with federal agents. The number was routed through encrypted overseas servers, she explained. Professional masking. Angela folded her arms tightly. This keeps getting bigger. Damon nodded once. His father's investigations suddenly carried terrifying new relevance. What began as a hotel discrimination scandal now pointed toward decades of organized corporate concealment. Not isolated prejudice, protected systems, protected money, protected power. Outside, rain hammered harder against the towering lobby windows, while crowds continued gathering behind police barriers. Protesters now held candles beside handmade signs. The movement was changing. Less outrage, more mourning. People weren't simply angry anymore. They were remembering. Inside, Denise received another urgent update from investigators upstairs. "We found deleted archive fragments," she announced carefully. "Somebody removed digital files connected to discrimination settlements approximately 48 hours ago." Angela frowned. "Before Damon arrived tonight." Denise nodded, "which means someone anticipated scrutiny." Harold Whitaker suddenly stood abruptly. "I'm done answering questions without legal counsel." But before he could move, Damon spoke quietly. "You knew my father, didn't you?" The question froze the room. Harold's breathing changed visibly. Damon stepped closer slowly. "My father investigated housing discrimination in Detroit during the late 90s. One of the corporations involved later merged into Ashbury Crown Holdings." Harold remained silent. "That's not coincidence," Damon continued. Finally, Harold whispered something barely audible. "He wouldn't let things go." The sentence landed like an explosion. Judge Holloway stared sharply. Denise stepped forward immediately. "Clarify that statement." Harold looked exhausted suddenly, older, smaller. He kept contacting investors, journalists, lawyers. He wanted public hearings. Damon felt cold anger settle inside his chest. "My father believed the law mattered." Harold laughed weakly. "Your father believed America worked differently than it actually does." The lobby reacted instantly, not because the statement shocked people, because too many recognized truth inside it. Gloria Ramirez crossed her arms tightly. "That's exactly the problem." Harold rubbed trembling hands together. "You don't understand how much money moved through these partnerships. Real estate, hospitality, banking, political donors. Nobody wanted lawsuits exposing discriminatory business practices publicly." Angela looked horrified. "So they buried complaints quietly." Harold closed his eyes. "They settled everything quietly." Damon's jaw tightened. "And people who refused silence?" Harold looked toward the floor. No answer came, but the silence itself terrified everyone. Outside, police officers suddenly approached the black SUV. The vehicle immediately accelerated into traffic before officers reached it. Michael Reeves watched through the glass. "They're running." Denise contacted federal teams immediately. The atmosphere shifted again. This was no longer only corruption. Now it felt like obstruction, possibly intimidation, possibly worse. Emily sat beside her mother quietly, while Eleanor cried silently into shaking hands. Years earlier, she chose comfort over conscience repeatedly. Now even her daughter looked at her like a stranger. Damon felt no satisfaction watching it. Only sadness. Systems destroyed people on every level. Victims, witnesses, even participants eventually. Angela's phone buzzed again. "Sir," she said carefully, "financial investigators just linked Lawson Equity Group to 3 shell corporations funding settlement agreements for discrimination cases nationwide." Judge Holloway shook her head slowly. "They industrialized silence." The phrase lingered heavily. Industrialized silence. That was America's true luxury product. Damon suddenly remembered something his father once told him after a humiliating restaurant incident during childhood. "They don't fear lawsuits, son," his father had whispered. "They fear patterns becoming visible." Tonight, the patterns stood exposed nationally, and powerful people were clearly terrified. Denise looked directly at Damon. "We may need federal protection protocols moving forward." The room absorbed that quietly. Federal protection for a hotel CEO exposing discrimination. America had reached a strange place. Then Michael Reeves received another call through his earpiece. His expression changed immediately. "Sir," he said carefully, "Chicago police just found someone breaking into your father's old Detroit property." The news hit Damon like freezing water. "Someone broke into my father's house?" Michael Reeves nodded grimly. "Detroit police responded 10 minutes ago after a neighbor reported suspicious activity." The Ashbury Crown lobby fell silent once more. Even reporters stopped speaking. The timing felt too precise, too deliberate. Denise Harper immediately contacted federal investigators while Angela moved closer beside Damon instinctively. "What exactly did they say?" Angela asked. Michael listened carefully through his earpiece. "Front windows shattered. Filing cabinets forced open, basement storage destroyed. Damon's chest tightened painfully. His father kept decades of memories inside that small Detroit house. Military photographs, family albums, handwritten journals. The realization hit him immediately. Someone wasn't searching randomly. They were hunting. Isaiah answered on the first ring when Damon called. "You heard?" his brother asked breathlessly. "Are you there now?" Damon demanded. "Yes, police everywhere." Background sirens echoed through the phone. Damon closed his eyes briefly. Their father's old neighborhood suddenly became part of a federal investigation connected to corporate discrimination and intimidation. America kept folding history into itself. "What did they take?" Damon asked. Isaiah hesitated. "That's the strange part." Damon waited. "They ignored electronics, left cash untouched. They only searched Dad's old office downstairs." Angela looked toward Denise immediately. They were looking for documents. Denise nodded grimly. Harold Whitaker sat motionless nearby while color drained steadily from his face. Damon turned slowly toward him. "You knew this would happen." Harold looked genuinely shaken now. "No," he whispered, "not this." Judge Holloway stepped closer sharply. "But you know who's afraid." Harold remained silent. That silence answered enough. Outside, the protest crowd continued growing beneath cold Chicago rain while helicopters circled overhead. National media had transformed the Ashbury Crown into the center of an unfolding American reckoning. Not just hospitality. Power, race, money, memory. Damon looked toward the massive windows reflecting candlelight from protesters outside. His father spent years trying to expose these systems quietly. Now the truth erupted publicly on live television. Too publicly for certain people. Emily Whitmore stood slowly from her chair. "My father hid copies somewhere else," she said suddenly. Every head turned instantly. Eleanor looked shocked. "What?" Emily swallowed hard. "He told me once that if anything happened to him, certain files would eventually matter." Denise stepped closer. "Where are they?" Emily looked toward Damon carefully. "I think he mailed them to someone years ago." The room held its breath. "Who?" Damon asked. Emily's eyes filled with uncertainty. "He never gave a name. Only initials." Angela opened her tablet immediately. "What initials?" Emily answered softly. "R.W." Harold Whitaker suddenly reacted. Tiny, brief, but enough. Damon noticed immediately. "You know who that is?" Harold stood abruptly. "I want my attorney." Denise blocked his movement instantly. "You're not under arrest yet," she said calmly. But leaving would be extremely unwise. The word "yet" echoed across the lobby. Angela searched rapidly through archived executive records. Then her expression changed. "Oh my God." Damon looked toward her. "What?" Angela turned the screen carefully. Richard Whitmore, Eleanor's dead husband, Emily's father, former Ashbury Crown compliance executive, the same man who secretly copied discrimination records before his death. Judge Holloway exhaled slowly. He was building evidence. Emily nodded tearfully. He wanted public hearings eventually. Mum begged him to stop. Eleanor buried her face again. "I was scared," she whispered. Damon's voice remained calm. "Scared of what?" Eleanor finally looked directly at him. "People above us." The honesty chilled the room. Harold Whitaker looked furious suddenly. "You're making dangerous assumptions." "No," Eleanor replied weakly. "Dangerous assumptions built this entire company." Silence crushed the lobby. Then Denise's phone rang sharply. She answered quickly before her expression hardened. Federal agents located financial transfers from Lawson Equity into private security firms, she announced. Angela frowned. "What kind of security firms?" Denise answered carefully. "The kind specializing in reputation containment." The phrase sounded terrifyingly professional. Damon understood immediately. Corporate intimidation outsourced through private contractors. America modernized everything except morality. Michael Reeves approached from the entrance again. "Sir," he said quietly. Protesters outside just started singing. The strange statement confused everyone briefly. Then the sound drifted faintly through the glass. Old church hymns, civil rights songs, voices layered together beneath rain and police sirens. The atmosphere shifted emotionally. Not riot, not chaos. Witness. People gathered outside understood something profound, tonight connected past and present. Every buried humiliation, every silenced complaint, every quiet settlement, every polite form of exclusion. Damon felt emotion rise unexpectedly inside his chest. Not victory, responsibility. His father died believing powerful systems could erase truth permanently. Tonight proved otherwise. Then Isaiah called again. This time his voice sounded terrified. "Damon," he whispered urgently, "I found something hidden in Dad's basement wall." The entire Ashbury Crown lobby fell silent as Damon listened to his brother's trembling voice through the phone. "What did you find?" Damon asked carefully. Heavy breathing crackled across the line. "A metal box," Isaiah whispered, "hidden behind loose concrete blocks in the basement wall." Damon closed his eyes briefly. Their father always believed paper survived longer than people. "Don't open it alone," Damon warned immediately. Too late. Isaiah's voice shook. "I already did." Angela stepped closer instinctively, while Denise Harper motioned for federal agents nearby to prepare immediate coordination with Detroit authorities. "What's inside?" Damon asked. Silence stretched several seconds, then Isaiah answered softly. "Names." The word landed heavily. Not financial records, not random evidence. Names. That frightened Damon more. Outside the hotel, protesters continued singing through cold rain while news helicopters circled overhead. America watched the Ashbury Crown scandal unfold nationally, but inside the lobby, the story had become intensely personal. Historical, dangerous. Isaiah continued speaking quietly. Dad documented meetings between developers, hotel executives, banking firms, and political donors. Denise looked sharply toward Harold Whitaker. Harold immediately lowered his eyes. Angela opened another secure file on her tablet. "Any recognizable companies?" she asked. Isaiah exhaled heavily. "Lawson Equity, Ashbury Holdings, North River Financial." Judge Holloway stared toward the ceiling slowly. "This reaches far beyond hospitality." Everyone understood immediately. Housing discrimination, bank lending practices, employment exclusion, luxury hospitality. Different industries, same architecture. Damon's voice remained controlled. "What else?" Isaiah hesitated. "There's a cassette tape." The lobby became perfectly still. Cassette tape. Old, physical, harder to erase digitally. "What's on it?" Damon asked. "I haven't played it yet." Denise immediately intervened. "Do not play anything until federal investigators arrive." Isaiah laughed nervously. "Too late again." Damon rubbed his forehead slowly. "What did you hear?" Isaiah's answer changed the entire night. Dad recorded a meeting. Harold Whitaker visibly froze. Angela looked stunned and... A meeting with who? Isaiah swallowed hard. With executives discussing how to contain discrimination lawsuits without changing company policies. Shock rippled across the lobby. Not allegations, not rumors, recorded evidence. Michael Reeves muttered quietly under his breath. "Jesus," Isaiah continued. One voice mentioned paying community leaders to discourage protests. Another discussed creating unofficial guest screening systems. Judge Holloway closed her eyes briefly. "Industrialized discrimination," she whispered. Harold Whitaker stood suddenly. That recording could be fabricated. Nobody believed him, not anymore. Emily Whitmore looked toward Damon with visible guilt. "My father wanted to expose them publicly," she admitted quietly. "But after threats started, he became terrified." Eleanor began crying harder. "He thought they'd destroy our family." Damon answered softly. "They already did." The words carried no cruelty, only truth. Outside, chants shifted louder beneath rain and sirens. The crowd had grown enormous now. Workers, students, church groups, families, people from neighborhoods long excluded from places like the Ashbury Crown. Candles reflected across wet pavement like scattered stars. America wasn't simply witnessing scandal anymore. People were reclaiming memory. Angela's tablet buzzed constantly with new developments. Major corporations suspended partnerships. Federal lawmakers demanded hearings. Former employees nationwide contacted investigators. One hotel lobby in Chicago had cracked something open across the country. Denise received another encrypted update from federal headquarters. Her expression changed immediately. "We have confirmation," she announced carefully. Lawson Equity maintained private intelligence contracts monitoring potential whistleblowers during the early 2000s. The room reacted instantly. Emily looked horrified. "My father was being watched," Denise answered honestly. "Very likely." Eleanor suddenly looked physically ill. "You knew this?" Damon asked her quietly. She nodded weakly. Richard stopped sleeping near the end. He thought phones were tapped. Michael Reeves stared in disbelief. "All because he wanted fairness?" Judge Holloway answered before anyone else could. "Power rarely fears anger. It fears documentation." The statement echoed heavily through the marble lobby. Damon slowly walked toward the giant windows again. Across the street, candlelight stretched endlessly through rain-soaked crowds. He suddenly understood something important. This movement no longer belonged to him. Not entirely. People recognized themselves inside the story because America trained generations to survive humiliation quietly. Tonight, silence finally cracked. Isaiah spoke again through the phone. "There's one more thing in the box." Damon turned slowly. "What?" Isaiah's voice dropped nearly to a whisper. "A letter addressed to you." The entire lobby held its breath. Damon felt his heartbeat slow. "My father wrote it?" "Yes, years after his death. Across distance, scandal, memory, and grief, his father somehow still reached him." "Read it," Damon whispered. Paper unfolded softly across the line. Then Isaiah began reading words written decades earlier. "If you're hearing this, son, it means the truth finally became too heavy to hide." Isaiah's voice trembled slightly as he read their father's handwritten letter across the phone line. Inside the Ashbury Crown lobby, nobody moved. No reporters spoke. No cameras shifted. Even the protesters outside seemed distant beneath the rain. Only the letter mattered. "Damon," Isaiah read softly, "if you're hearing this, it means powerful people finally failed to bury what they spent years protecting." Damon closed his eyes. His father's voice returned instantly inside his memory. Steady, patient, worn down by life but never fully broken. Isaiah continued, "I spent most of my life believing hard work guaranteed dignity in America. Military service taught me discipline. Your mother taught me hope. But these men taught me something darker." Judge Holloway lowered her head slowly. Everyone understood those lessons. "They created systems where discrimination survives politely," Isaiah read. "No burning crosses, no screaming mobs, just paperwork. Meetings, policies, quiet denials." The lobby remained frozen. Every executive, every employee, every reporter, listening. Outside, candles flickered through cold Chicago rain, while civil rights hymns drifted faintly against the glass. America itself seemed to pause. Isaiah's voice cracked slightly. "I investigated them because too many families kept disappearing from opportunities without explanation. Loans denied, promotions delayed, homes blocked, dignity quietly stolen." Damon felt emotion rise sharply inside his chest. His father carried this burden alone for years, without recognition, without protection, without victory. Angela wiped tears quietly while reading live reactions flooding social media nationwide. Millions watched, millions listened, millions remembered. Isaiah continued reading. "Most dangerous systems never announce themselves openly. They survive because ordinary people learn comfort matters more than courage." Eleanor Whitmore began sobbing openly. The words destroyed her defenses completely, because deep down she knew they described her perfectly. Harold Whittaker stared silently toward the marble floor, not defeated, exposed. There was a difference. Damon looked slowly around the lobby where his humiliation began hours earlier. Now the same space held something entirely different. Witness, truth, memory. Isaiah unfolded another page. "Son, if these records become public someday, remember something important. This fight cannot become revenge. Revenge only changes faces. Justice changes systems." The sentence settled deeply across the room. Even Denise Harper looked visibly moved. Outside, protesters slowly stopped chanting. Someone live-streaming the phone call must have turned speakers toward the crowd. Now hundreds stood listening silently beneath rain and police lights. Isaiah continued, "You will be tempted to hate people after what you discover. Resist that temptation carefully. Hate clouds judgment, but accountability creates transformation." Damon felt tears finally gathering, despite years of emotional discipline. His father still guided him. Even now, even after death. Michael Reeves removed his security earpiece quietly. Alicia stood beside Gloria Ramirez, holding her hand. Employees who once feared speaking now stood openly beside investigators and witnesses. The culture inside the hotel had already changed. Not because policy changed, because silence broke. Isaiah's breathing steadied before reading the final page. If America ever confronts these systems honestly, people will claim the country is collapsing. Don't believe them. Truth does not destroy nations. Silence does. Judge Holloway closed her eyes completely. The line sounded less like a letter, more like prophecy. "Last thing," Isaiah whispered while reading the closing paragraph. "Luxury was never supposed to mean exclusion. Real luxury means safety, rest, human dignity. Build that world if you can." Then silence. Long, heavy, sacred. Nobody inside the Ashbury Crown moved for several seconds. Damon finally spoke quietly. "My father cleaned factory floors after military service because banks denied him business loans repeatedly." His voice remained calm, but every word carried generations behind it. "He died believing America preferred comfort over fairness." Damon looked toward the protesters outside, then toward the employees surrounding him, then toward the federal investigators gathering decades of evidence. "Tonight," he continued softly, "I think he finally saw people choosing differently." Outside, applause slowly began beneath the rain. Not celebration, recognition. Candles lifted higher across the crowd. Inside the lobby, Harold Whitaker suddenly looked very old. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Damon turned toward him. "The truth keeps moving." Angela's phone buzzed again with another federal update. Major hearings scheduled. Corporate subpoenas expanding. Additional whistleblowers emerging nationwide. The movement had become unstoppable. Emily Whitmore approached Damon carefully. "My father believed you'd eventually expose them," she admitted softly. Damon looked surprised. "He never met me," Emily smiled sadly. "He followed your career for years. He said you built hotels the way America should have built opportunity." Damon struggled briefly for words. Outside, church hymns rose again through cold Chicago wind. The city itself seemed transformed overnight, not healed, but awake. Denise Harper stepped beside Damon one final time. "You realize this investigation could affect corporations nationwide?" Damon nodded slowly. "It should." The cameras captured him standing beneath the same chandeliers where he was humiliated hours earlier. But now the image carried entirely different meaning. Not exclusion, reckoning. Then Isaiah's voice returned softly through the phone. "There's something written on the back of the final page." Damon frowned. "What does it say?" Isaiah paused, then read the handwritten sentence slowly. "The people protecting these systems will eventually come for you too." The warning echoed through Damon's mind long after Isaiah stopped speaking. "The people protecting these systems will eventually come for you too." Inside the Ashbury Crown lobby, dawn slowly approached beyond rain-covered windows. Chicago's skyline glowed pale gray against the fading darkness, while exhausted reporters continued broadcasting live updates across America. Nobody wanted to leave. The night had become larger than scandal, larger than politics, larger than one hotel. People sensed history shifting. Damon slowly lowered the phone from his ear. For several seconds, he simply stood beneath the crystal chandeliers where humiliation transformed into reckoning. Then he looked around carefully. At Gloria Ramirez, at Alicia, at Michael Reeves, at Judge Holloway, at Emily Whitmore crying quietly beside the mother she barely recognized anymore, at investigators carrying boxes of evidence collected from decades of silence, at ordinary employees finally standing upright without fear. The lobby no longer felt like a luxury hotel, it felt like testimony. Outside, protesters noticed movement inside the building and began applauding softly through the rain. Not because the fight ended, Because it finally became visible. Angela stepped beside Damon quietly. "Federal hearings begin next month," she said softly. "Congressional committees already requested testimony." Damon nodded. "And the hotels?" Angela handed him updated reports. 43 Ashbury Crown executives resigned overnight. 9 additional corporations announced emergency discrimination reviews. National investors demanded transparency audits. University business schools requested access to investigation records for ethics programs. The system had started turning against itself. Not from morality alone, from exposure. Judge Holloway approached Damon slowly. "You know they'll attack your credibility now," she warned. Damon smiled faintly. They already started. Online commentators questioned his motives. Political pundits called him divisive. Corporate lobbyists warned against damaging investor confidence. The pattern was predictable. America often punished people exposing systems more aggressively than the systems themselves. But something felt different this time. Too many witnesses, too many recordings, too many buried stories finally connected together. Michael Reeves walked toward the entrance, where police officers now relaxed beside exhausted protesters. "I spent 15 years thinking security meant protecting property," he admitted quietly. "Tonight changed that." Damon looked toward him. "What does security mean now?" Michael answered without hesitation, "Protecting dignity." The simple answer carried enormous weight. Across the lobby, Eleanor Whitmore stood slowly from her chair. Hours earlier, she controlled the room completely. Now she looked like a woman finally seeing herself honestly for the first time. She approached Damon carefully. "I don't expect forgiveness," she whispered. Damon studied her quietly, then answered truthfully. "This was never about forgiveness." Eleanor nodded weakly. "I spent years believing professionalism required emotional distance. But really, I was protecting comfort." Outside, morning light slowly touched the rain-covered streets. Chicago looked different after nights like this. Softer, more honest somehow. Emily Whitmore approached her mother silently. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Emily reached forward carefully and took Eleanor's trembling hand. Not absolution, not resolution, just acknowledgement. Human beings surviving consequences together. Damon watched quietly. Systems mattered. Policies mattered. But ultimately, change always returned to people choosing courage over comfort. Denise Harper approached carrying final investigation summaries. "We'll be busy for years," she admitted. Damon looked around the transformed lobby. So will the country. Outside, protesters began dispersing slowly as sunrise broke fully across the city. Some embraced strangers, some cried quietly, some simply stood still, absorbing what they witnessed. Because deep down, everyone understood something important. This story was never exceptional. That was the real tragedy. Gloria Ramirez stopped beside Damon before leaving. "My sons watched everything tonight," she said softly. "For the first time in years, they believe speaking up matters." Damon felt emotion tighten his chest again. "That matters more than stock prices," he replied. She smiled warmly before stepping into the morning rain. One by one, employees began removing temporary barriers, separating guests from staff areas inside the hotel. Small gesture, powerful symbolism, no more invisible lines. Angela suddenly laughed softly while checking her phone. "What?" Damon asked. She turned the screen toward him. Across social media, one phrase dominated millions of posts nationwide. "Dignity is not a luxury." The movement no longer belonged to corporations or politics. Ordinary people carried it now. Damon walked slowly toward the massive lobby windows, one final time. 20 years earlier, his father stood outside systems like this, begging America to notice patterns hidden beneath polished language and professional smiles. Tonight, the entire country finally looked, not away, at them. The marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled. The architecture remained beautiful, but now the building carried truth instead of illusion. Damon turned toward the cameras waiting near the entrance. His voice remained calm, steady, human. "Justice begins the moment silence ends," he said. Then he paused briefly before offering the final truth his father spent a lifetime trying to prove. Dignity denied anywhere diminishes dignity everywhere. The lobby fell silent one final time. Not empty silence, reflective silence, the kind arriving after people finally recognized themselves honestly. Damon stepped toward the hotel entrance while morning sunlight slowly replaced the storm over Chicago. Outside, ordinary Americans waited beneath fading rain clouds. Workers, families, veterans, students, people carrying their own stories of humiliation and survival. And for the first time in a very long time, many of them looked hopeful. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.